Okay, well, you've seen my installation video on the Audi Q3 of the aftermarket audio system. And I just wanted to turn now to the process of tuning the VX800i amp and speaker system that's in the car and the approach that I'm taking to doing that. But before I go into the setup in the car, I'll just show you the equipment that I'm using. So first of all, now there are other ways to do this. So for example, you can get apps that go with an iPad, but I'm going to be using a computer. I have an iPad, but I think a computer is probably the easier thing to use. And then a microphone, a calibrated microphone. This is a EMM6 microphone, and that's the serial number of it. And so there's a calibration file that goes with that, so that it performs linearly. It's a mono microphone. In order to have that working, you need a unit here to plug into it, and this has got a USB output on it, which means it's then simple to connect into the computer. And so that just appears on the computer as a device that you can record information from in the REW software. Then the other challenge is really, how do you send signals from the computer to the audio system in the car? Well, what I'd originally thought I was going to be doing was using the sound card that I showed in, I don't know, maybe it was video 2 or 3, which was an Asus Zonar sound card, but actually that has only got an SP diff output on it. And in fact, the input on the VX800i amplifier is an optical input. So I've had to turn to another piece of kit that I had floating around, which actually works quite well. It's called an NFC. It shows up as something called Audio Winner. So this connects using Bluetooth. So this has got an SP diff output and importantly an optical output. And you can select whether you're going to operate in digital or analog mode. So that's great. And then with a little USB power pack, I can plug that in to that, and that switches on, and it takes hardly any power. So that power pack will keep that running for donkey's years. So with being able to communicate from the computer to this device, to the optical cable, which then goes into the amplifier, I can send signals from the REW software, the tone sweeps, through this Bluetooth device to the optical cable to the amplifier, and then pick up that audio signal from the speaker system and then record the output from the speakers using this microphone. And then that microphone is connected back to the computer, and that allows me to then read the signals in. And from that, I can then make measurements and then adjust those measurements. And I'll talk to that process a little bit shortly. All right, now I'm coming to the car. What I have installed here, and I mentioned this on a previous video, a USB lead which is connected to the amplifier, which is now down below there. But also what I realized was I needed an optical cable. So there's an optical cable here which is also sort of permanently installed and tied up with these wires. So I'm going to be unwrapping this and setting this up in the car and show you the setup. Alright, so I have this microphone installed more or less in the position that I am. That's pretty much where the line of my ears are, and roughly where they would be when I'm sitting in the car, in the driving seat. That is connected to the computer, or will be in a minute connected to the computer. There's a USB line coming out the back there. I've got this NFC unit switched in. There's the optical cable going into the back of it. It's run from that power unit, so that's the wireless connection from the computer to the amplifier. And then this is the connection to the computer from the ambient sound system in the car through the calibrated microphone. And what I'll do is I'll sit in the center position of the car there in the rear with the computer. Probably one other thing to mention, of course, while I'm doing this stuff, I'm in the car with the ignition on but without the engine running. So what's probably a really good idea is to put a battery charger on to stop the battery from running completely flat while you're doing it. So I've shown the setup of how to make recordings, and now I thought I would take you through some of the process that I've gone through in order to arrive at a series of settings, which I'm fairly happy with at the moment. Also, I suppose it's probably worth saying, what are my objectives here? So, for example, some people in car audio, they want so much bass, they want they want things moving around like the number plate rattling and the like. Well, I mean, if that's your objective, probably this is not the right place to get your information from. What I'm after is basically something where, for example, you can't hear the subwoofer as a separate item. I don't want to be able to think, oh, there's the subwoofer kicking in. I want it integrated seamlessly with the door speakers. I want quite a smooth sound. I don't want something which where the treble is splitting your ears and forcing you to reach for the volume control to turn the thing down. To be honest, if anything, passenger comfort notwithstanding, I want to be reaching for the volume control to basically turn it up to enjoy the music. So I mean, that provides certain constraints. It's quite a difficult thing to achieve a sound like that, particularly in an environment in a car where the acoustics are certainly peculiar. Small space, and also lots of noise from the environment as you're going along. Yeah, so another thing is, getting the balance right is a difficult thing. Getting the balance between the hearing the detail in the music and also not being overblown with the detail. Having the bass and the drum section and the lower frequency of the music sort of coming out nicely and presenting themselves, but without being punchy and without feeling like you're being thumped. With that being said, I thought I'd show a few curves. So what I've got here on the screen are some measurements from day one in the car. So I've got the front left, front right, rear left, rear right speakers, all the door speakers together. I have a target curve. I've taken this from a JL Audio presentation. Then also I have a series of tone sweeps from when I was, so this is probably video 2 or 3, where I was running the audio system in the room that I happen to be sitting in now, where I made some measurements. So it's interesting, I think, probably in the first instance, to look at the difference between the room so here's the room front right speaker, and here is the car front right speaker. This is the car energy profile from a tone sweep, and this is the room that I'm sitting in now, how the acoustics of that room. And you can see, well, actually there's typically more high energy, more treble, so there's more treble roll off in the car. Part of that is that when the crossover was set in the room, when I made these measurements, the crossover was set at 0 dB, whereas in the car I've gone for -2 dB. I'll come on to that topic later, but that's what I chose to do. So there's lower energy anyway in the upper frequencies in the car because of the way the crossover's set. But there's a couple of things you might notice here, and I'll come back to this later. There's a couple of humps, so there's sort of some energy here in around the sort of the 300 to 1 kilohertz frequency range. In the car there's more energy in the sound spectrum. Also, you can see there's a couple of humps in the bass frequencies, and there's a suck out on this particular speaker here. You can see that there's a big hump there around, what would that be? It's 115 hertz, and also a hump here at 190. Let's look at the front left. Again, you're seeing an area of energy here. If I were to bring this bass frequency up further, you'll see probably more clearly what I'm talking about. So if I was to put them on the same footing there, you can see there's an awful lot more bass energy coming out in the car, and here there's quite a lot of more energy here at around 400 to 800, and then up to here 800-ish, sort of 700 to just over 1,000 or 1,300. I'm not going to go into all of this in great detail, but But ultimately, what I observed was that there was a couple of regions here where there was a bit more energy probably in the sound than I was happy with. So to investigate whether or not these frequencies where I was seeing these pulses of energy, these peaks of energy, and what I did was I did a quick parametric equalization. So this is actually, I think it was the same, pretty much the same parametric equalization curve for most of the speakers. I mean, very similar. But what I did notice was certainly some of the things that I was finding in the sound which I think were irritating. So a lot of bass energy, and particularly kick drum, feeling like your ears are being punched. This equalization certainly softened that particular problem. So I realized that I needed to put more energy into thinking about how to better parametrically equalize these frequency regions, and I'll come on to talk about that shortly. Another aspect that was something of a challenge was subwoofer integration. So I spent a whole day on this, trying many different things. Ultimately, where I ended up was realizing that I needed to invert the polarity of the subwoofer. Now, you might ask, did I wire it up wrong? I think I was pretty careful about that. So I think genuinely the location, the way that I constructed the subwoofer, and with the location, in fact, actually integrating it with the crossover from the main speakers was helped by using a negative phase. Also, and in fact, I won't even show you it, but I went through many different crossover settings, looking at different crossover type settings. Normally they talk about these Linkwitz-Riley crossover settings for your speakers, so this will be these ones here. In fact, actually, what I found was best to get the subwoofer integrated, a Butterworth filter, and using a very steep cutoff of 48 decibels. Ultimately, where I've ended up with that, I used 80 Hertz for the subwoofer crossover point, and actually I had 50 Hertz for the speakers. That's where I am at the moment. Let's look at where our starting point was. So this is a tone sweep. So this is the door speakers plus the subwoofer, run from about 20 Hertz to 300 Hertz tone sweep. So not the full spectrum, just the region of interest. And you can see, this pretty big sort of suck out here, and then a hump of energy here from the subwoofer. And I tried all sorts of things, different crossover frequencies. You can see here. I mean, and this was on, I don't know, day 3 or 4 or something that I was looking at this. So a lot of different things attempted, and pretty much everything that I tried actually resulted in a worse performance. But eventually, through a combination of parametric equalization on the subwoofer and using negative phase and using these Butterworth at 48 decibel crossovers, I was able to get a subwoofer, a low frequency response that looked something a little bit more like this here. So this is the target curve, and you can see, okay, so it isn't perfect, but certainly it's kind of more in line with the sort of bass profile that you might like to see. So there may be a dip there. I think this is to do with the acoustics of the car, and this was the best I was able to do. So that's the subwoofer. Yeah, okay. So I established that some of the problems that I was observing could be resolved by a little bit of parametric equalization on the sort of kilohertz and below frequency range. And I realized that actually such a broad parametric equalization of this is a very blunt tool, and perhaps what might be better to do would be to use something like the REW software to apply parametric equalization in the range that I was interested in, to try and fit it to this target curve that I'm trying to work towards. If I look at the front right and the EQ'd front right speaker, yeah, okay. So you can see here that the treble frequencies are lining up fairly similarly. and then I'd applied some equalization to that curve in the sort of kilohertz region through to about 70 hertz, I think was the figure. So then there were some filters calculated, and you can see here that a lot of the energy from this region has been brought down and under control, much more by using the parametric equalization. So that's the front right speaker. So let's look at the front left, for example. And so yeah, so you can see here this big energy region here and here has been brought more under control. Similarly here, some of the excursions of energy have been brought under control in this region as well to make a more flat frequency response. So that's all good, and I'll show in a second how to do that. Now, I'm not an expert at this, but I'll very, very quickly show you how one goes about doing parametric equalization in REW. So let's do a front left calculation here. Let's go to equalization. We use the generic equalizer. There are lots of ones here that are tailored to particular pieces of equipment, but generic will do. What is important is the range that we're interested in matching. So in our case, say 100 hertz to a kilohertz, and what individual boost. We might want to allow some boost to occur. Often people talk about only cutting frequencies, and you can sort of understand that in that often you have these suckouts to do with room acoustics, which it doesn't matter how much energy you put into them, you can never really solve the problem. But I'm just allowing a little bit of energy to be able to be put in there. So now what we do is we just tell it to match the target response. Okay, so here's the target response. This is you set this as a house curve. Let me see, whereabouts would that be? I think it might be under preferences, house curve. Yeah, so we have a house curve there, so okay. And then we can adjust the level of that if we wanted to adjust that. So let's just, I kind of like the look of that, because in this region here it's going a bit more through the center. You can play around with that. But ultimately we're going to try and take control of these resonances here and some of these resonances here, and maybe a little bit of boosting here for some of these suckouts. So what we do is we just match the response curve to target, and it goes through that and calculates. And in fact, actually, I think that these suckouts here were too big for it to be able to do anything to. So it's really just dealt with these regions here. And maybe this one here, if I'd have changed that to 50 hertz, let's try that. Let's just try that now. So make 50 hertz there, and then recalculate those response curves. There you go. So it's done a lot more now. So yeah, you can look at these filters, these frequency responses. So it gives you a frequency, it gives you a gain to employ, and it gives you a Q value, which is to do with the width. So a small Q value is a wide peak, and a large Q value is a narrow peak. There's a calculation behind that. So that's quite nice, because you can use this tool to calculate some quite precise values as starting points. Of course, I put these numbers into the tune software, and I went and listened to them in the car. And it did resolve a lot of the problems, but I'll tell you, to my ear, it did an awful lot of damage to the sound. Yeah, so that's what I'd done. I calculated the EQ curves for these various different. So this is the rear right. These you can see the energy is reduced there. Here as well in this region, significantly reduced. So I'd got precise values, and I put those into the tune software as is, and then listened to that. And actually, I found although it made a huge difference in terms of the problems that I was seeing with the boominess and the too punchy kick drums in this region, it actually sort of robbed the music from a lot of the quality. So it made it less involving and less exciting. What I then did was then use the parameters that I calculated in the REW software here. These were the base parameters. And I used those to recalculate. So using the frequency values and the Q values as is. But what I did was I decided to rather than using the values that the gain reduction or gain boosting values that are calculated in the software, what I did was put in a parameter here so that I could change it to say 20. I think 25% was the 25% was the first figure I used. So I listened to that, and that helped a bit. But I thought there was more to be had, so I then went to 40%. So that would be 40% of the gain reduction that was calculated by the REW software to get that curve. So what I've gone for is 40% of the reduction in energy as calculated by the gain reduction. That's what the spreadsheet does. And I started off just using these areas that I calculate, that I show here in red. So basically the ones that are below about 200 Hertz I didn't really touch yet. So I used 40% on these values here that are red, and then subsequently later I then used half of that 40%, so that would be a 20% number for these ones here that you see here from blue and below in frequency. So that's ultimately what I then used in my tune program, and that is implemented here. So using those revised, somewhat less extreme reduction in energy values, I went through. So in the tune software, you can see the front left maps, the input maps to the output here through these lines. You can see here, and each one of these, 1, 2, 3, 4, so that's front left, front right, rear left, rear right, have their own equalization settings. So you can then go to the equalizer. So this EQ1 is the front left equalization setting. This is the front right, rear left, rear right. And within each of those, there are parameters that I've calculated in this spreadsheet. And additionally, there's the work that I did with the subwoofer, which is under EQ7, where actually there's a lot of resonance and energy from the subwoofer around the sort of 45 Hertz level. So what I've done is use parametric equalization to level out the energy in the subwoofer, and you've seen what the curves for that look like. They've relatively good. Coupled with the combination of inverting the subwoofer, inverting the polarity of the subwoofer, using 80 Hertz as the crossover, using this 48 decibel Butterworth filter. The car speakers, they've got a crossover of 50 Hertz. So they're actually below. So the subwoofer and the speakers in the car have an overlapping region. So it's nevertheless, the results of this are actually quite good. So also subwoofer, setting the level of the subwoofer. That's been quite a bit of me listening to this. When you do the calculations, when you do the measurements using a microphone, it will suggest to you that you have a much higher value for a subwoofer setting. So maybe 3, 4, 5 decibels higher than the figure that I've got in here. But this is from me listening to it and where I think it sounds good. So I've trimmed back the subwoofer. Yeah, so these are the settings here that I'm using as of today. I'm not saying that there won't be certain changes going on in the future, certain further optimization as I continue to listen to it. But at the moment, it's sounding pretty good. It's sounding like the kind of thing that I want to listen to for long periods of time without getting ear fatigue, but also is a satisfying and nice sounding system. I've boosted I've attenuated the rear speakers. There's quite a lot more bass in the rear seats, so there's no need to have the rear speakers up at the same level as the front speakers. Also, the front speakers want to be a bit louder because you want to make sure, to my ear, you want to make sure that the sound is in front of you. So I think that's quite important to get balance. You don't want to feel like it's all going on behind you. Turning to the speakers. So these are the speakers that I've got in the car at the moment. And there's a technical data sheet aspect that's worth looking at here. So as I've mentioned in an earlier video, I went for the crossover at the -2 decibel setting. I think if it's set to 0, it'll be too prominent, it's too punchy, and I find that unsatisfying. I have experimented with this contour on and off. So the contour boosts the frequencies from around, I don't know, 1500 Hertz up to just below 10 kilohertz. So there's this sort of mid-range, well, sort of lower or upper mid-range frequency boosting activity. I have listened to that. In fact, actually, I have that switched on in the rear speakers, and I have that switched off in the front speakers. In the rear, maybe the way that it's located in the door, there's not that much energy comes out of the tweeters. And also, of course, I've reduced the volume of the rear speakers, as I mentioned previously. Well, if you configure the car in that way, and you were to use the VX800 amplifier like this, and you were to use these settings here, and you might need to adjust the distances a little bit if you sat at a different distance from the steering wheel than I do. But I think that these settings work quite nicely. Well, that's kind of, I think, the best I can do in order to help guide somebody who's trying to do this through the process who might not be so familiar with using these tools. But I'll put these settings, I'll link in the description of this video to this file with these settings in it. I'll put a link also to this Excel sheet here, which has got these calculations in here. Yeah, one additional quick point that I thought worth mentioning was setting the output level of the amplifier. Now, in order to maximize the power output of the amplifier, what you do is you increase these values to the maximum possible, and actually that is whatever the highest level is, which in this case is the front right. If you click this button here and then start to move that up, they all move, maintaining the difference between them that you had set, but taking them up to 12 decibels, taking this front right channel up to 12 decibels. Now, of course, that means that you're getting the maximum power out of the amplifier. But what it also means is it's a very, very powerful amplifier, and it also means that the 30 steps in your volume control are now spanning that full power range. And in fact, what might be a lot more sensible is to have a much lower values, in other words, to limit the power output of the amplifier, but then giving you a much finer degree of control on the volume level between the steps on your volume control. And if you had much finer divisions on the volume control than 30 divisions, then it probably wouldn't matter. But actually, there are only 30. So I think that having the output level set at a significantly lower level makes a lot of sense in order to give you a bit more finer control over the volume in the range that you'll end up listening to. And so far, I mean, if I have it set with that one as it was at 4.1 decibels, running it at about 15 or 16 is very loud in the car. So that's even, half the turn of the dial. So yeah, I think it's worth bearing in mind. If you follow in these footsteps, enjoy. It's been an absolutely fantastic run, and I'm very, very happy with the sound in the car. I know that there's still potentially some further tweaking to do, but I'm at the point now where I will listen for a long period of time before I make any decisions on what I want to do subsequently. So, hope you've enjoyed this. If you have, please give me a like. Thanks very much. Cheers. Bye-bye.